So yeah, for those who are just joining, welcome to the DFTI voter guide. I'm gonna distribute this in some sort of proper way a little bit later, just so it's really easy to get the kind of the basics of this. But last in the 2018 election cycle, I did a voter guide in a similar nature to this, but it was all on my Instagram stories. You can find me on Instagram at instagram.com/Dan from the internet if you're not following me there already. And a lot of the purpose behind that was to just sort of give a summation of all of these like ballot measures and principles and these things, because you get it, you receive it, people receive it in the mail, but they kind of just don't know what to do with it, and you get this unfortunate lingering sort of aspect where you don't know exactly what you're going to do when it comes to voting. There are resources out there, but I don't think the resources are taught that often, or nor are they readily available nearly as much as they should be. So that's definitely a cause for concern, at least there. Yo, what's up, Bam? I see you in chat already. I'm just gonna pop up Twitch on here too. Just so I have my laptop to consult as well, to cheat off of. Can I pop out this chat? Let's see. I know I can in this. Yeah, so I did that voter guide earlier on in 2018 to give people that idea, and it's really good. I've gotten a lot of really good questions about how to vote and what we can do, or what are good, what things we should be voting on or what people should be voting on. And it's really confusing, unfortunately. It should not have to be this confusing, but it is unfortunately the case that it is purposely made very difficult to understand a lot of the particularities when it comes to voting. And it's made difficult on purpose by the interests who stand to gain from the ballot initiatives. California, especially, is really interesting with these ballot initiatives because not a lot of states allow the constituencies, the regular democratically, they don't allow the full public, is what I'm trying to say, to participate in these ballot measures as often. It's usually stuff that's all done at the legislative level at a state. But California is weird like that, cool like that. All right, so let's get into it. I think we can start off kind of easy with presidential politics. I mean, if you're watching this, if you made it this far, you're probably going to understand my political opinions on Donald Trump and Joe Biden. But in case if you're not clear, I don't think the idea of do you vote for Trump or not is really the big question. I think it's more of like, why do you vote for Joe Biden? And the sad thing is Joe Biden hasn't given much of a reason for people to like vote in the affirmative for him. And that's a loss for the Democrats because they should really put forth candidates that you actually want to vote for. That makes the most sense logically, but of course they don't do that. But you can learn a lot about politics from this process of voting and finding out who's supporting things and who is against things and who are against measures. And so one thing you'll also learn, I think this election is really teaching people, is that a lot of times the way democracy is kind of handed down and thrown at us, it does end up being the lesser of two evils, and it sucks. It really does. It shouldn't have to be that we are only voting for a slightly less bad option. But when there are only two options, you have the opportunity for extremes. And the extreme option in Donald Trump, and really not just Donald Trump, but the entire Republican Party establishment that has decided to lean into the extremist behavior that is supported by Trump and others within the conservative movement. You're voting for that whole party apparatus to continue having power and continue having control. And when you put it down between those two kind of options, you start to realize the practical nature of who you're voting for. At least the power of the vote, even if you're voting for the lesser of two evils, if you're voting to replace an incumbent, that vote sends a message. That vote gives the incumbent or that vote gives the challenger, the person running to unseat the person who's just been in office for a while, that gives that person a political rhetorical opportunity to say, hey, these people just voted me in by whatever large margin. Maybe it was close, but maybe they voted me in by a large margin, whatever it is. They voted me in. I have the power. They voted me in because I ran against the previous person coming in. In this case, Joe Biden ran against Donald Trump. And so now he is going to legislate because the people voted him in, and that is against Donald Trump. Now, of course, it's a really sucky kind of thing. And on my ballot, the presidential nominations are on the fourth page. You also get Rocky de la Fuente Guerra and Kanye West on the American Independent Party. Now, in California, there's this really interesting thing where the American Independent Party has nothing to do with being a nonpartisan voter or being an independent voter. You'll find that a lot of confusing stuff is made off of, like, a lot of confusing things happen on the ballots because there's wiggle room for confusing things to happen. Not necessarily like it should happen for like any good reason or like it's happening for any good reason. It's just that these are the ways that these are simply the ways that the ballots are, the voting process is just kind of taken advantage of. It's purposely made confusing, which is why I'm glad to be doing some of these things. I was distracted a little bit because I was enabling the chat on YouTube because I know Bam's in there. Who else do I see? Havoc Project, sup. Thank you for being here. But yeah, I was on talking about president and vice president. So you have Rocky de la Fuente and Kanye West running for the American Independent Party. That's not the same as being an independent voter. In California, that's called nonpartisan voter. But I shouldn't have to say, well, Rocky Fuente Guerra runs elections all the time. He just like tries to be president. He's just like one of those randoms that's out there. I'm of course voting in California, where they're probably going to vote for Joe Biden, go for Joe Biden regardless. But yeah, it's a choice you have to make strategically, especially if you live in a swing state. You'll have to really be careful about voting for the only two viable candidates that are there, Donald Trump or Joe Biden. And those are very strong choices there. So that's pretty easy. After that, on the ballot, you have the state propositions, essentially. And in California, Liza was saying, California has the ballot measure proposition system where there's a lot of measures that get put on the ballot for individual people to just vote on in their own way. And I think that's really cool. It gives people an opportunity in direct democracy. The democracy we have in the United States is a form of representative democracy because we're electing people to represent us. We're not actually voting on policy. We're not saying yay or nay on tax cuts or tax hikes or whatever, except through ballot propositions like this, which is really cool. Not a lot of states have this. So, resources. Generally, I would recommend using Ballotpedia. That's why I have it up here next to me. I'm not even sure where I'm pointing at this point and how that works. Yeah, it'll definitely be this way. It's looking like. Whatever. Yeah, it is. So Ballotpedia is where I generally go to. It's kind of like Wikipedia in a sense that it is structured. It's can be edited in a public-facing, open-source kind of way, but it's also vetted very heavily, and especially because Ballotpedia has that thing you potentially run with when it comes to bias in politics, then you will definitely there's definitely the concern to make sure there's non-biased information on Ballotpedia. I think Ballotpedia does a really good job of keeping non-biased information there. So on Ballotpedia itself, if I navigate over here, hang on, sometimes my mouse disappears. There, it's back. So here it shows the 2020 California ballot propositions. And in California, we had Proposition 13, which we had in our primary elections up in March when we did not successfully nominate Bernie Sanders. And I'm going to go through the propositions in order for the record, by the way. So I will get to Proposition 24 for sure. But we've got 10 of those before that and about 11 in total. So like I said, Proposition 13 already voted on, already rejected. Not much to be able to talk about with that there. But let's go into Proposition 14. And even if you're not in California right now, I appreciate you for hanging in there. Drop your questions so that I'll go back and I can look into wherever your local measure is that you're looking at, so we can have fun there. And if you want to help me out, make sure you share the stream so that people know to watch and do the thing. So, Proposition 14, as we pull it on here, and as I can even read it on my ballot. So, on the ballot itself, I'll read it here. It says, State Measure 14 would authorize bonds continuing stem cell research initiative statute. It authorizes $5.5 billion in state bonds for stem cell and medical research, training, research facility construction, administrative costs, and dedicates $1.5 billion to brain-related diseases. It appropriates general fund monies for repayment and expands related programs. In California, you have to state the fiscal impact usually of these things. So it says the fiscal impact increases state costs to repay bonds estimated at about $260 million per year over the next 30 years. Wild, yo. So this is basically authorizing money in the state for stem cell research. Stem cell research, if you don't already know, it's basically using and growing human cells in a certain way to regenerate body parts and functions. There are some like religious concerns over how close are you getting to modifying genetic life, and there's some legitimate moral concerns to be had there in science as well, especially like the CRISPR gene editing software that's or gene editing tool that is a separate thing from this. But the whole morality aspect of being able to play with human DNA is something that is out there, so it's worth mentioning that. But this is basically more towards funds for stem cell research. Back in this does require a little bit of history, because back in 2004, when the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine was created, voters approved Proposition 71, which created the thing and issued $3 billion in bonds to fund and finance it. And as of October 2019, CIRM has $132 million in the funds remaining, and they're depleting or they're suspending projects because they just don't have the money. Totally fair. We'll have to do that. And another thing you'll start to realize with doing these ballot measuring initiatives and these processes is that not only will you sometimes be making the case of lesser two evils kind of choice if you're voting on these, but you also have to realize that these measures are the result of a lot of time spent in the legislature between everyone involved in the legislature to decide and advocate for these policies and get it on the floor so that it can make it to the ballot. There's a bunch of other propositions that don't even make it to the possibility of appearing on our ballot. So there's always a lot of actors on good and bad in these things. We did focus on stem cell research earlier we did fund this in 2014. I mean, in 2004, the funds are gone. So the question is, what has been done since then with the funds, right? And that's where you get into like the support and opposition. So when you're reading the support for any kind of bill, it's a really easy kind of heuristic or like thing you can fall into mentally to decide, hey, I'm going to vote based on endorsements, and whoever endorsed this thing, I'm going to kind of go off of them and chill with them, basically. If I like a politician and they support this thing and they endorse this thing, I'm going to endorse it too. And those are good things, but you also want to realize that each politician has their own interests. Politicians don't always read clearly through the things they're supposed to be endorsing. Would you believe that? A lot of times the endorsements are done by a politician's staff. And there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of things that are messy. Sometimes our favorite politicians get things wrong. Or sometimes you understand that our favorite politicians may have nefarious interests at hand. And you can really kind of suss these out, or at least bring up these questions, if not really know about a politician's true intent. You can bring up these questions through the process of researching these ballots. So it's pretty interesting. So supporting Prop 14, We have Gavin Newsom in the California Democratic Party, the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, and the UC University of California Board of Regents. And in opposition, I mean, like, you don't really have any official, like, big thing here, but in opposition, you don't see a major person, but you have some opposing arguments here. Not every ballot initiative is really heavily funded, and a lot of times another way you'll look into who's really behind a ballot initiative is who is funding it, and we'll get there later. I'm spending more time on these early ballot initiatives because we're kind of getting into the mode of reading these and understanding these. But for this one, not really much money has been spent in the opposition. That doesn't mean that the opposition is necessarily wrong or that they're going to lose, although usually spending has a pretty decent say in how these initiatives run. But the people who are opposing it include the editorial boards of the LA Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Mercury News, East Bay Times, Bakersfield, California, and the Orange County Register. And a lot of what they're saying are that this is just not an urgent spending priority. It sounds rough because stem cell research really helps with people who are facing serious injuries. People who have like spinal issues can get stem cells injected, so parts of their spine can regrow and help them. It's really important. But a lot of the really interesting thing is that, yeah, we're in debt. COVID is a really big factor right now. And at least from what I was reading, at least some of what I was reading, there's a little bit of issues with accountability and management at California Institute for Regenerative Medicine. So that doesn't mean, you can have mismanagement and things can go wrong anywhere. That's not like an end all be all. But you still want to kind of, you want to be able to know, you want the government to be accountable in some way. You want them to try to at least show some measure of accountability. And if it doesn't seem like they're doing that right here or far in this point, then we'll have to. That's why I was leaning no on this one, obviously, because this California Institute for Regenerative Medicine is not the only thing that's doing stem cell research right now. And 2004 is really important because the Bush administration and a lot of conservatives in the Bush administration were kind of wary of stem cell research for the moral reasons, the quote unquote moral reasons that I listed earlier. But now there are a lot of other organizations looking into stem cell research furthering that. Of course, it'd be helpful if the state could benefit and pay for those things and help spend those things. But as we're going to see in other propositions, we have to kind of, even though we're not spending the money here, we don't like have a ledger. It's not like our personal bank accounts. We are, in a way, this is money that we're spending in our taxes and we're helping choose to appropriate. So we have to make those considerations while we're there. So for 14, I went with no, just because it seems like they aren't doing a really good job of like being accountable with what they're doing, and the need to have a California state-run specific thing for stem cell research could be going to other projects that California can be on the front lines of. But for now, we'll go no on that. I'm going to take, not a break really, but I'm just going to share this. LOL, Annie texted me saying on Berkeley time. I just had to make sure the tech was working, all right? So we're there. We're nearly there. But yeah, I'm just gonna share this on social media, let people know that I'm live and on air. So yeah, you can also help by sharing on that. I'm like 15 subscribers away on YouTube from hitting 1,000, and if I hit 1,000, I can start doing some things that involve actually making a little bit of money on YouTube. So if you can hit subscribe button if you're not already, that would be helpful. How should I share this? Yurt. Share it on Instagram, share it on Twitter, do all the sharing. Let's make this as fun of a party as we can. I think there's a lot of aspects of politics that are very draining right now. Politics can be sort of a lot, especially with everything going on, and it's emotionally draining and takes a lot out of people. So try to have a little bit of fun with it. Try to do exciting things, interact, get wild in the chat. Come on, let's have some fun. And just, I think there's a good saying, and I've said this saying before, that protests are no fun unless you can dance at them. And that's kind of the mindset I have with politics, even though it's very intense stuff and it's very in the weeds and granular. You still want to try to have fun with it as little bit as you can for your own mental sanity. It's a preservation for that, at least. All right, let's go into Prop 15. Um, as soon as I plug in my phone to charge, because that's about to die. Prop 15 Rooney is a doozy. This is a really fun one as well. There's a lot of tax loopholes that get opened and closed because of propositions, and kind of the California proposition system is a never-ending bout of these like whack-a-mole with taxes. So here's another one. Proposition 15, if I read it from my ballot, increases funding sources for public schools, community colleges, and local government services by changing tax assessment of commercial and industrial property. It's an initiative constitutional amendment. Um, so basically, what this kind of does is that taxes, God, to explain the California tax code, Proposition 13, that was established and voted on in 1978, basically instituted a kind of tax freeze for new properties to prevent people who are on retirement or fixed income from basically being priced out and forced to be homeless because of the amount of taxes they were paying on their homes in California that were increasing in value. Weird flex, but okay. Um, so yeah, that Proposition 13 has kind of stayed in place since then, and it was really popular because it said that the tax is limited to no more than 1% of the purchase price at time of purchase, with an annual adjustment equal to the rate of inflation of 2%, whichever is lower. So the amount of tax you pay, residential, commercial, and industrial property tax that you pay would be capped at its 1978-ish level, essentially, and it couldn't grow too much over time. Think of this almost like rent control for people who own property, and you're kind of like in the ballpark there. Um, and yeah, a lot of people, especially seniors who own homes, kind of love Prop 15 in California because it's one of the few ways they're allowed to continue owning homes. Must be nice because that's not something I'm holding my breath for, given my generation and all that stuff. But the reason I would say to vote yes on this is number one, for those people we were talking about earlier, it doesn't touch housing property. This Proposition 15 is mainly for commercial and industrial properties, and there are some protections for small business owners who are usually caught in like the middle ground of these policies where, oh, it's meant to mainly make it so the rich are footing the bill, but you go down the line of each policy and the price of who is rich or who isn't. And sometimes you get working class families or mom and pop immigrants who have a business or have like an apartment unit that they own, that makes them seem like, oh, they're in the landlord class, they're in the owning class, but really they're working hard to make ends meet. And especially during COVID-19 and everything going on right now, that's even harder to do. So again, going off of a lot of the information from Ballotpedia, upon full implementation, the ballot initiative would generate between $8 and $12.5 billion in revenue per year. And the way it would distribute that revenue, it would distribute those revenue to specific areas rather than going to the state's general fund of like tax revenue and how things get doled out through that. Um, but most of the funds would like supplement decreases in taxes that are going elsewhere. So the state's personal income tax and corporation taxes have been deduced. Um, and so it's just one of those balancing acts. We're paying less taxes over here, so you have to raise taxes somewhere else to make up the fact that we're missing money in the budget. It's like if you are in the capitalist hell world of society today and you're working multiple gig jobs and you lose one, you have to get another to supplement that income. It's definitely a lot like that. But when it gets to the meat and potatoes, the really interesting thing here when you want to, sorry, flight path, so there's a plane flying over you, probably hear. But the funding of public schools and community colleges and local government services, that is actually, Prop 15 would only take that to about 40%. So 40% of the revenue generated from Prop 15 would go to school districts and community colleges, and 11% would go to community colleges, and 89% would go to public schools, charter schools, and county education offices. And there'd also be a requirement that schools and colleges receive a minimum of $100 per full-time student. So that's a lot of like in the weeds stuff. It doesn't really make sense for your decision here or there, but it's helpful to understand like where this money actually goes to. Yes, it goes to schools and all those things, but not quite if you look into it and if you really read into it. Not as much as you would think, at least for sure. It's definitely good to have, but mostly it's offsetting the fact that we cut taxes elsewhere, so we need to make up that money somewhere else. All in all, as far as fiscal responsibility goes, speaking of fiscal responsibility, let's see if the Republican Party supports it. No, they don't. Looks like the Republican Party is opposed to it, as well as Boston Properties, the Columbia Property Trust, Paramount Group, Americo, and a lot of large property managers. Now, again, like I said, there are protections in here to where if you're on that like line of like a small, medium-sized business, you are a little bit kind of cushioned from some of the war damages you could do here. In California, let's see. The change from the purchase price to market value as to what is being assessed for tax purposes would be phased in beginning fiscal year 2022 to 23. Properties such as retail centers whose occupants are 50% or more small. This is written wrong way, but I kind of know it. Basically, if you have 50 or fewer employees, the new change in the assessment would be phased in a little bit later to compensate for the fact that you're a smaller business, money's a little bit tighter, and you'll need a little bit more money to adjust to these things. And that's important because if you're starting a small business in California, I mean, it might be, I'm a little bit biased for like why you would want to start a small business in California. I think it makes sense to start a good business in California, but the issue is that there's a lot of high barriers to entry to starting a business in California that you don't have in places like Wyoming or Delaware, or to keep it real, like Texas. By lowering the barriers to entry for business, that's how states like Texas and Nevada and others are starting to attract companies from California. But it's a mixed bag. The downsides, of course, you don't always have as robust as a workforce in these other places. Texas and Nevada, it's not that bad because they're both big hubs. But in my extreme example of Wyoming, you may not be able to find all the people you need to fill your roles at a workplace. Of course, with moving remotely, that might change all this calculus together. But I'm just kind of going off of general things here. All in all, I think I've spent enough kind of time really going into this. Prop 15 doesn't really touch the good thing going on for California home buyers or homeowners, and if you call that a good thing, whatever. But it doesn't touch anything involving that. So don't buy in any fear mongering about that. It's mostly targeting commercial industrial properties, having them pay more taxes and property taxes so that we can fund our schools and to compensate for taxes that were cut other places. So you can't call yourself fiscally responsible and then want to cut taxes at all forms of things, because then you get to what Republicans really want, which is to cut taxes so much that the government can't function. And then when the government doesn't function, private corporations can step in, and a small, concentrated amount of people can make a lot of money siphoning off the system because we're paying for private firefighters or something like that. Anyways, what I didn't do before this was get myself a beverage, and I have literally no beverages, although I have another one of my debate Trulies on the other side of the room, and that might be the move. Lukewarm Truly, that's a vibe. I'll be right back. Da 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 da. Da-da-da-da-da. Folks, remember to stay hydrated. Hydration is important. Um, yeah, that's right, Bam. We're already drinking on chat. I love how Bam's like, yeah, we definitely need a drink. No, I'm kind of doing this freewheeling because I'm not doing it. I'm not doing this prompter style. We don't do that shit here. We do this freewheel. God, that needs ice, but we'll work with it. Things I do for you, the people. Also, Bam, no one truly does not make you drunk. Anyways, Proposition 16, repealing affirmative action. Yes, let's move on. Proposition 17, the voting rights restoration for persons on parole amendment. Proposition 17 is really okay. No, I'll talk about 16 really fast. I'll be real, because that's a touchy one. Proposition 16 repeals Proposition 209. Oh, you want me to chug this? Well, no, I can't chug this right now. I really want to shotgun this, but that's a whole different party from chugging a Truly. But I'm about to talk about racism, so let's go. So, Proposition 209 is super controversial, super topical. It was passed in 1996, so I have literally nothing to do with it. And the idea was, oh my god. So there's multiple different aspects here. Proposition 16 was passed in 2009. It repeals Proposition 209, which came from way earlier. And it's basically on if you can do affirmative action in a state, in entities that are controlled by the state. So this particularly relates to the University of California system and the California state universities, as well as applying for jobs. The idea of affirmative action, and a lot of people are saying it, were that to remedy issues caused by America's history with racism and sexism and discrimination against people from marginalized backgrounds. This includes people with disabilities. This includes, actually, I don't think this includes people with disabilities specifically, but it should. It goes off of race, color, sex, ethnicity, national origin. And this is for things that relate to public employment, education, and contracting. So there's a lot of back and forth in the weeds in this, and trust me, people do go back and forth in this, but for the case, all intents and purposes, Proposition 209 allowed affirmative action, and in 1996, Prop 16 was passed, and that repealed Proposition 209. So it's saying that no public institution in the state of California could use affirmative action when they're looking for people to hire or to admit into their schools. So Elizabeth Warren would have been screwed. No. The thing with affirmative action, I think a lot of people don't understand, especially as it relates to colleges, is one of the primary beneficiaries of affirmative action is actually white women. Wouldn't know that. But a lot of what was starting with an affirmative action, white women were benefiting from the fact that you had to not necessarily have a quota per se, but you had to consider the fact that there were a lot of men in the society, and especially in business and in culture, and we need to change that a little bit. And that definitely helps with the tides because now there are more women in college than men. Women are certainly starting to have a little bit better of a role in the business world, but not necessarily, of course, like great. There's still issues with workplace discrimination, gender pay gap, sexual harassment, a number of these different things. And I would have made that Warren joke if I were sober or not had any sort of Truly or whatever. But the ultimately when you're getting with these things about affirmative action, it's are we giving unfair a treatment or pass to a group or something like that. And affirmative action was never going to do that. It was never going to like put in a quota system. It was just going to say, okay, we're allowed to have a holistic review process that considers race and sex and all these other different marginalized groups and categories in our overall compelling interest. So that is constitutional according to the Supreme Court, and that's what the federal principle is what would we default to if we voted yes on this constitutional amendment. So I botched the beginning of it. If we voted yes, we'd be repealing Prop 209, which stated that the government and public institutions cannot discriminate against or grant preferential treatment to persons on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in public settings. And again, it's not saying like, oh, we're going to give preferential treatment now that we're voting this in. It's saying that this is going to be something that we can consider along with everything else. It was noted right here pretty well. Where was it? In the U.S., strict scrutiny is a form of judicial review that requires law, policy, or program to serve a compelling state or interest and be narrowly tailored to address that interest. Courts have ruled that strict racial quotas and racial point systems in higher education missions are unconstitutional, but that individualized, holistic reviews that consider race when tailored to serving a compelling interest, such as educational diversity, are constitutional. Havoc Project, yes, Blue Moon counts, and Blue Moon's actually one of my favorite beers, so that's pretty rad. Thank you for commenting and chatting. I encourage you to continue doing that in the chats below. But what that means is, yeah, strict quotas and things like that are unconstitutional, and it'd be pretty easy to challenge those on that basis. There's precedent for that. But holistic reviews to serve the interest of the body that is creating that process is specifically protected by the Constitution by existing judicial precedent. Of course, judicial precedent is kind of just like a joke. These are funny terms. These are things we're supposed to believe in, but we have an entire wing of the judiciary that has become partisan and conservative, and they don't care about those things. So I don't know. At least in California, that doesn't seem to be too big of a problem. So I would say yes on Proposition 16, because, I mean, my fact of the matter is there were 8% of UC Berkeley, I believe's student black population in 1996 was black. And when I was a first year in 2014, the black student population was 2%. And that's with affirmative action being gone. So it's not like the argument that, oh, there's no need for affirmative action anymore. There's no need for any sort of like more equitable processes for getting people into colleges or getting people into these institutions. It's not like it's not necessary. It's definitely necessary because it's losing right here. Yeah, I'm not going to belabor the point too much because I can go into affirmative action a lot. There's a lot more propositions, so I want to get into that. Next, we have voting rights for people on parole. This is Proposition 17. And reading it straight from my ballot, restores the right to vote after completion of prison term, legislative constitutional amendment. So apparently, oh yeah, it says right here, currently the California Constitution disqualifies people with felonies from voting until their imprisonment and parole are completed. The ballot measure would amend the state constitution to allow people with felonies who are on parole to vote. Therefore, the ballot measure would keep imprisonment as a disqualification for voting, but remove parole status. So if you're in jail, you lose the right to vote. That's fine. I mean, I don't know if that's really fine. In fact, I will take back on the statement. That's not really fine. I don't believe that just because you are incarcerated, you should lose the right to vote. There's another, I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but there's another proposition about having people vote when they're 17 if they're going to be 18 by the time of the general election. And the argument against that is, that I don't agree with at all, says that people are very naive and they may be impressionable when they're voting and their motives may not be in the right place. To my response being, so there are adults who are 18 who pay their taxes, who do all those things, whose motives are not in the right place. And some of those adults who only have one person, one vote, utilize their money and their outsized political power to gain control outside of the voting process. And they still get to vote. They totally get to have the vote. So I don't think if you are if you meet the requirements of the country, and I think this country is being a U.S. citizen and a couple of other different things here or there, you should get the right to vote. And unless you're like on death row or something, and I have hot take opinions on death row, but you should be able to vote just regardless, because just because you are in prison doesn't mean your say as a prisoner or your say as an American is any less valid. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a say in your community or the areas around you. That's just your ability as a person. And that's, I think, a lot of the reason why this is happening as well, where people who are people who are on parole, who are trying to get back into society, is what I'm trying to say. They really want to be able to integrate into society and to feel a sense of normalcy and to be able to go. Maybe the warm truly is making me kind of like burp a lot, so that's the thing. But people are trying to kind of reintegrate into society when they're on parole. You kind of want to worry about recidivism and people going back into being incarcerated, and of course that's a burden on the state with like taxes and all those different things. So you want to avoid that if you can, as best as possible. This is a really straightforward amendment. I don't want to like belabor and overcomplicate it, but I'll show you really quickly who's supporting it. Officer Kamala Harris, a couple of the other Democrats, the ACLU, which I generally agree with. And who's opposing it? The Republican Party, of course, because the Republican Party is always on the side of decreasing voter rights if they believe those voters might be conservative. I say this a lot, and maybe people know this, but maybe people don't. But there are states where a gun license is a fully logical way of voting. And a gun license is voter ID. You can use that as voter ID to prove that you are a registered voter and can vote. But you can't use a student ID to prove that you're a registered voter, because students vote one way and gun owners tend to vote another way. And that's just another way voter ID and voter suppression laws can really impact society in this country. So that's something to watch out for. Proposition 18, we're at that 17-year-olds voting amendment. Thank you, BAM and Havoc Project, for the moral support. Thank you to Hard Seltzer Beverage Company of Boston, Massachusetts, who makes Trulies, for the Truly support. Proposition 18. Should 17-year-olds vote in primaries? Yes. Look, if they're going to be able to vote in the presidential election, like say right now, and if I were 17, let's say this were already passing and I got to participate in the process where I got to pick the Democratic candidate that I really wanted in that election, in the primary. And whether that candidate won or not, I got to feel good that I got to support that candidate and canvass for that candidate and really push for them. I felt that I really got to participate in that process, and not that, there's some arbitrary thing standing in the way that's saying, no, I don't understand enough of this process that I can't participate and join in. I think if you're old enough to die in a school shooting, you're old enough to vote, because your life gets very political if you are at one of these school shootings, even if you're under 18. And that gives 10-year-olds the right to vote. And I'm not maybe there is a line, of course, right? Maybe not with 10-year-olds, but the 17-year-olds and 16-year-olds and Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, who can definitely form political opinions that might change over time, might flip over time, like, they who saw their friends and family not family, but like family as far as their school family and like teachers and loved ones in that way, if they had to watch their friends and loved ones get gunned down, grazed, by these crazy gun nuts as they're shooting up schools, then how are they not allowed to have an opinion on that? How are they not allowed to have an opinion on, hey, maybe I don't want other people to have to go through this kind of trauma again. I don't want other people to have to deal with this or have to buy bulletproof backpacks because of this. I think, much like with the previous proposition, when you give people the empowerment that they can contribute to society, they become better political citizens. And then it just becomes a matter of, do you want better political citizens or do you not? And if you don't, why not? Is having an informed voting populace good or bad for you and your like overall like political existence? It tends to be bad for conservatives because younger people tend to vote Democratic. Orange County Register tends to lean conservative naturally. Says there's no compelling reason to extend the right to vote to those who are age 17, especially considering there are plenty of avenues for politically interested young people to get involved in the political process. Yes, there are, but how many people, again, like there are a number of avenues to get involved in the political process that have nothing to do with voting. You can get involved with money. You can get involved with political influence and just knowing the right people who happen to be close to power. You start to have political sway where maybe you have some dirt on a candidate or can primary them. Um, there's a lot of different ways to get involved in the political process. And this is one of those margin cases where I would feel like we are empowering more people at that age to really get involved in the political process. And if they learn some lessons and they decided that they regret their vote when they were 17, they voted in the primaries, then that's a learning experience. We regret our votes sometimes. But I think you have to really just kind of, when it comes to voting, expand the pool of voting. Is at least where I fall on the line. How's it going? How are we doing? Good number of people watching. That's fun. Appreciate every one of you. I really do. See if I can speed these up a little bit. I love how I said on one of the difficult ones. So 20 is a little bit messy. Criminal sentencing, parole, and DNA collection. A vote yes would add crimes to the list of violent felonies for which early parole is restricted because they're too severe, and it would recognize certain types of theft as fraud crimes, certain types of theft and fraud crimes as wobblers, which could be charged as misdemeanors or felonies, and require DNA collection for certain misdemeanors. This is supported by the Republican Party and opposed by the Democratic Party. Also opposed, and I care less, especially on issues about civil liberties and legal rights. I care less about where the political parties stand on these, and I care more about where the ACLU does. Because the ACLU, I disagree with when it comes to certain First Amendment things, because I don't believe that Nazis should have free speech rights. But the ACLU is very staunch on civil liberties, and I disagree with them when it comes to things like that in the First Amendment, but I really appreciate them for things like this when it comes to criminal justice, because among one of the reasons that the ACLU was against this, and the fact that wow, if the fact that if Safeway is ever in favor of something so much so they're spending money on it, don't do it. And they're probably in support of it because of like shoplifting or some shit like that. But yeah, all the police unions are in favor of something. That's a sign. Wow. But no, the main thing I was getting at is the thing that is a really red flag for me on this one is that it increases state and local law enforcement costs relating to the collecting and processing of DNA samples for misdemeanors. So that means we're giving law enforcement officials the right to collect DNA samples from misdemeanors. I don't trust law enforcement with biometric information is the word. I don't trust them with biological hair strands, DNA, fingerprints, all that stuff because they misuse it. I don't really trust private corporations because they misuse that data and sell it to nefarious actors as well. So I don't like any of it really, if I'm being honest. Um, on that alone, I would vote no on this. But again, I don't think many people would disagree that we do want to prosecute violent crimes and make sure that there aren't these loopholes for violent offenders to get off very easily in society. But you have to step outside and realize that this proposition is not the one way to do that, not the one way to take care of that. And if this is the kind of proposition, or if there's another one in the future that we're coming up to, where you ultimately vote no, but you really care about this issue and you just think that the proposition is handled clunkily, then that might be an opportunity for you to start getting engaged in local politics and deciding that you really care about this issue and that the proposition mishandled it because of the way it made its way onto the ballot. But you can learn about those details, and then next time it comes around on the ballot, or next time it comes around in the state assembly or the state houses or whatever state legislature you're dealing with, um, you can be an advocate for that thing. In my last Dan from the Internet 20 Bad News, I talked about how sometimes in the local level and the state level, there's so few actors politically who are like getting involved and actually making calls to local representatives and things like that, that there's an empty space that you can take advantage of and kind of showing your political influence. You can have outsized political influence than just your one vote would allow, only by calling your representative and being on top of them for this one issue that you happen to be very knowledgeable about. This is definitely an opportunity to do something like that. Meanwhile, so yeah, no on Prop 20 for the reasons I just stated. Checking in on degenerate chat here really quickly. Is it clean? They're talking about Ben Shapiro's favorite drink, whether it's seltzer or not. I happen to know that Kyle Kulinski is controlled by Big Seltzer. Shout out Kyle Kulinski of Secular Talk, good YouTube channel. Sean from Audio Face also likes him. Bam, you said Ben Shapiro's favorite drink is toilet water. No, Ben Shapiro's favorite drink is the raw sewage he said Palestinians drink. Obviously. Havoc Project, he said, let me drink this first. I would have killed for a stronger backpack in high school. Still shouldn't have had school shootings, but I have had a lot of heavy books to carry for high school. No, yeah, I hear you, because you couldn't have been one of those people who had a roller backpack, because that was just lame. Um, yeah, having a roller backpack would just be way too damn lame. So you wouldn't want to carry more around, so that's a lot better. Would I ban explosive boomerangs? um, maybe I ban them from Crash Bandicoot because it's way too powerful in that game and they need to be nerfed. But no, let's move on. I think I'm actually starting to remember who Avenue Project is based on that question. Okay, so Proposition 21, local rent control initiative. I'm gonna say yes on this, but I'm gonna tell you why, and I'll read from the ballot itself just so it's kosher. So Prop 21 expands local government's authority to enact rent control on residential property. It allows and to establish rent control on residential properties over 15 years old. Local limits on rate increases may differ from the statewide limit, and overall, there might be a potential reduction in state and local revenues in the high tens of millions of dollars per year over time. Basically, this is one of those like freezes things we were talking about. So Prop 15 or whatever the earlier one, yes, that involved a tax freeze. That was the result of a bill passed in 1978, and this is a similar thing. So Costa Hawkins is the very popular rent control sort of initiative that's going on, and it's popular in like rent control dogma because It was a thing that was passed in 1995. And before that, local governments could enact rent control in pretty much any way they wanted to. Um, but Costa-Hawkins created some different sort of rules for that. Specifically, landlords can increase rent prices to market rates when a tenant moves out. It's called vacancy decontrol. But before then, if you are staying in an apartment and it was built before 1995, then your city or locality can choose whether or not that unit is rent controlled or not. If it's rent controlled, excuse me, if it's rent controlled, that naturally means that there's a ceiling on how high the rent can increase in any given year. It makes sense for rent to increase generally over time due to inflation. But of course, rent increases, if they don't also match an economy where wages are increasing, can leave a lot of people behind. So that's a disaster. Voting yes on this because basically another good thing is that a lot of these laws protect these small landlords to some extent. Landlords who own no more than two homes with distinct titles of subdivided interests, they don't need rent control on those. A lot of times, those, again, you're smaller, you're struggling more to make ends meet, so you get a little bit more flexibility there. But generally speaking, if you live in one of these older sort of apartments, then you get to have the possibility of having rent control. If you're in one of these new apartments, then there is less likelihood of having rent control. A lot of times you have these new sort of skyscrapers or developments going up where they're nice and fancy and it says, oh, there's affordable housing there. There's affordable units available. They aren't rent controlled units. They're maybe supposed to be affordable because a condition of that locality allowing the building to be built said that these have to be below market rate to some extent. But it's a type of rent control that's a lot more arbitrary and definitely less strong. So this now makes it so, yeah, like I said, rent control on housing that was first occupied over 15 years ago. So anything older than 15 years ago will now be eligible for rent control. So that already makes it so things built between 1995 and 2005 are like back on the board again for being able to be under rent control. And these are nicer buildings that maybe, even if it's a newer building, doesn't necessarily mean it's maintained better, but at least you might have that chance. And it's probably a little bit more earthquake proof as well, because that's another California thing you have to worry about. So that's a yes on 21 that I would suggest. Proposition 22. Oh my God. This has been one of the most hilarious, shameless, ridiculous. I need a drink. Proposition 22 is some ho shit. Proposition 22 has shown the true colors of Uber and Lyft and Instacart and all these tech giants who are profiting so well off of the status quo. Not only that, they're profiting off of the general premise that in Silicon Valley, the rules are you get to move fast and break things. You get to just have fun with living within the laws as they currently exist and stretching those. And once you get in trouble, just accepting your slap on the wrist and moving on and continuing to make your billions upon billions of dollars. This is another case of that. So Prop 22, reading it from the ballot right here. If you're liking this, like it, subscribe it, share it. That helps more people see this. So that makes it awesome. State Measure 22 exempts app-based transportation and delivery companies from providing employee benefits to certain drivers. Let's read that again because that's what should make it so obvious. Voting yes on Prop 22 exempts app-based transportation and delivery companies from providing employee benefits to certain drivers. So right now, if you work for one of these rideshare companies, you're not like actually working for the company itself. Like Sometimes you work for Uber and you work for the tech company Uber and you work for their marketing team or their sales or product management, or you're one of their technical software engineers. Cool. Good for you. Bet you're living a lovely life. Um, Same for Lyft and Instacart and those things. But most people who we know or have heard of or have interfaced with who work for these companies don't work for these companies. They're contracted by these companies, which means unlike a place you work for that gets salary, um, they pay certain taxes for employing you. You pay certain taxes out of your paycheck that comes out every single month and goes towards all these different things. When you're contracted, you, the person who is working for Uber, Lyft, or whatever, are treated as an independent contractor, like you're being self-employed, and that you run your own business. Your business being providing your labor to these rideshare sharing economy programs and apps that utilize the fact that they're not paying you so that their executives and their recently graduated college students can become very wealthy. They don't have to pay for the health insurance. They don't have to pay for the car maintenance. They don't have to pay for many of the things you generally need to do in order to run your quote unquote business of picking up groceries for people or doing chores and taking out the trash for people. I mean, the rideshare companies this year have been ridiculous. The sharing economy things, because even before this proposition happened, when you had the COVID lockdowns originally start to happen, um, and Instacart employees were being really relied on because no one wanted to go into a store and shop. So these employees were being sent into, or these gig economy workers were being sent into stores to shop for people, um, risking catching COVID-19 themselves. But Instacart was responding to people who were saying, hey, I'm busting my ass delivering food for people, and the people I'm delivering to aren't friendly, or they're not compensating me well enough, or when they do compensate me, Instacart is taking more money from me than they should be, or Uber Eats, or insert name of the app here. They're all underpaying the gig economy workers and taking a larger cut of the profits than they really should have been taking. So it was just all such a ruse. It was really fucked up, honestly. So not only were they doing that, Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, all of those, what they've been doing is they've been muddying the waters. They've been spending stupid, like ridiculous amounts of money. And to the tune of, I mean, $184 million on the support side, to make sure that people are duped into believing that they should make sure that their gig economy workers that they interact with don't have to be paid or treated fairly by Uber and Lyft. Uber and Lyft earlier this year did this thing where if we had to abide by this law in California, then Uber and Lyft are just no longer going to operate in California. And that was a whole bunch of lies. They were trying to apply pressure to the state by getting Uber and Lyft users who didn't know the wiser to say, hey, I don't want Uber and Lyft to leave California. Hey, let's work against this thing. And now they're having uh, Instacart delivery drivers actually hand people they're working with propaganda that is pro Proposition 22. There are progressive voter guides going out that are fake progressive voter guides that look progressive and they might agree with the propositions that you and I might do, but then they say yes on Proposition 22 as though we're like sheep, as though we're really stupid. So this is not a controversial ballot measure. If you vote no on it, that means that the California law that was passed earlier this year that requires Uber and Lyft and Postmates and all these other companies to classify their gig workers as employees, therefore providing them healthcare benefits, proper pay, a couple more of the rights you get as a full kind of employee. They're trying to avoid this so that these big tech companies can continue hoarding wealth. And you think they're going to treat these gig economy workers well? No. Why would they be investing in self-driving technology? They're going to replace them in 5 or 10 years. They're just using the labor of these gig economy workers to pay them as little as possible to act as a hedge while Uber and Lyft get the technology to make the cars drive themselves. Because once the cars drive themselves, screw the people. The people are just an extra thing you have to pay for. That is the raw economic kind of calculation that a lot of these companies make. And it's not immoral, as in like it's evil, it's amoral. It's a lack of morals. So, given all of this, you have to understand, you have to see through the corporate propaganda. You have to understand that California is just way too big of a market, and that Uber and Lyft may have to, for legal reasons, stop doing service in California, but they're sure as hell going to figure out how to work with the government to get it back, because too much of Uber and Lyft's and all these rideshare companies' business is in California. So something's going to give either way. I encourage everyone to vote no on this, because voting no on Proposition 22 actually holds Uber and Lyft and Postmates accountable to the people who you have seen and interacted with in the rideshare space who have helped serve you. Maybe giving you a ride home when you were drunk as shit, or giving you a ride home when you didn't have a car, or delivered you food that you really needed, or anything else like that. This is about those people. This is about those workers that you as an individual have a lot more solidarity and stuff in common with than you do with any of the high-powered executives who are trying to steamroll this bill and the supporting side of it. So yes, in the words of Bam in that chat, tax them hoes. On God. Havoc Project. What if I encourage the building of explosive boomerangs? Can I use the independent contractors to build them for lesser wages? Yeah, if Uber decides to pivot into doing like Acme kind of bomb making and explosive stuff, then that'll be a thing. Proposition 23 is another doozy, and it's another one of those messes. I'm going to try to, because in a lot of places it's been over-explained, so I'm trying not to over-explain it. But basically, this is another one of those cases where the industry that stands to profit off of this is just steamrolling past it. And so you have to be careful about that. Wouldn't it be a shame if I wasn't streaming and wasn't recording? I hadn't checked that in about 45 minutes, so I'm glad I did. And we are streaming and we are recording, so I'm glad this is working, Bam. Hopefully this is continuing to give Bam some hopefully this is beginning to give Bam some confidence that I can record Power Report consistently, but mostly give myself confidence that I can record Power Report consistently. But yeah, Proposition 23 is another proposition about dialysis clinic requirements. We had one of these about dialysis clinics in 2018, I believe. Yeah, this was Proposition 8. It was more about requirements for dialysis clinics to issue refunds to patients for profits above 115% of the cost of direct patient care. So basically, it was preventing some of the rampant over profiting from people's dialysis treatment care that was happening with Proposition 23. I mean, that was happening with, in general, with dialysis treatments in this country, in this state, let me say. Proposition 23 happening this year is a lot of the same usual suspects. If you look at the opposition, it is the Republican Party, DaVita Incorporated, and Fresenius Medical Care. They do a lot of the dialysis treatment in California. And there's also another one of these groups. It's like, yeah, Californians for Kidney Dialysis and Patient Protection is no, sorry, it's the other one. But like, the thing I'm trying to get at is that don't trust the names of these organizations, because they're usually created for the proposition. They're usually created to make it seem like, oh, by the name of the proposition, clearly they have my best interest at heart. But you have to see where that money is coming from, and whether or not they really do have your best interest at heart. And it's not always easy to find out, but it's usually not hard to find out if you do a little bit more digging. But a lot of the politics is hidden in the nuance. So if you are with me here still and you are willing to dig into the nuance and understand what's going on, I appreciate it, because that's where the power lies, where most people would have just like given up and gone, nah, there's too much for me to get into here. But once you know how to suss it out, it's not too bad. So again, I'm just sort of looking who's supporting California Democrats in the unions, or the union who's opposing the Republican Party, and the dialysis companies. I would vote yes on this because what it's doing is basically making it so dialysis clinics need to have an on-site physician there while patients are being treated. It's basically just like more tightening restrictions and regulations on dialysis clinics because right now you have clinics that are just poorly run and as a result are giving people bad care with dialysis. This is cleaning their kidneys. This is absolutely crucial for living. So they the reason they're opposing this bill that would, the reason the dialysis companies are opposing this bill that would require them to do a better job of performing dialysis services is because it would cost them more money. And they argue that we're already stretched thin for medical professionals. We can't afford to put everyone a dialysis physician. And to that I say, if it really gets to that point where we're running out of physicians who can be at these chronic dialysis clinics, then I think later down the line you have to revisit this and go, okay, how can we bring in more of these physicians to the state to fill in this gap? Because I know it's very hard to get into med school, but I know there's a lot of different certifications you can get on the way to practicing medicine that isn't doing the 10-year long stay in med school that it can be. And I think we need to do a little bit of that adjustment as a society as to what we are really devoting a lot of time to. And if we're devoting too much time to these over certifications of things. Because if we are for a lack of dialysis clinic physicians because the certifications are taking too long, then maybe we can adjust the certifications. And we can adjust the certifications in order to make it so we can get more physicians ready to go sooner. Making sure they're still able to do all the stuff they need to do, but keeping that there. So yeah, I would say yes on this, mostly because it will piss off the pro dialysis people, and will provide protections. Subscribe to Dan from the Internet. YouTube.com/Dan from the Internet, Twitch.tv/Dan from the Web. Proposition 24, Consumer Personal Information Law and Agency Initiative. I need to actually see my notes for 24 because yeah, this one, yes, this is a mess. And I did get a question about this before from Annie, actually. So Proposition 24 is called the Consumer Personal Information Law and Agency Initiative. And reading it straight from the ballot, it permits consumers to prevent businesses from sharing personal information, correct and accurate personal information, and limit businesses' use of sensitive personal information, including geolocation, race, ethnicity, and health information. Establishes the California Privacy Protection Agency and would cost about $10 million, but probably the low tens of millions to create this agency and do the oversight. Privacy is definitely a major issue in politics broadly. I mean, especially with tech, especially with big tech in California. A lot of these tech companies are headquartered in California. So what California does here carries a lot of weight. California is one of the larger economies in the world, the fifth largest, I believe, now. So what we do forces companies to actually kind of adjust because they need to comply for California. And then once you comply for California, it's easier to push those companies to just expand that compliance outward. This would create a privacy protection agency, which I think is really good. I think the government is sorely lacking in its knowledge about technology, and the tech companies know how to use technology and how to exploit technology faster than the government does. So we need some sort of defense for that. So all these sound like pretty decent things when you're kind of going into it. You're preventing. It's a lot similar to GDPR, was a European Union privacy regulation that is the reason why a lot of websites now have banners at the bottom or in the middle that make you click on them all the time, making sure that you know that the website is taking cookies from your web browser and you consent to those cookies. That's GDPR. Those are regulations requiring these tech companies to be more specific with how they are using your data, and be more transparent with that, or face really large fines. So it's definitely good that you're having some of these things kind of had out, and like we're thinking about how to address these things. Because before we were just kind of let the tech companies do whatever the hell they wanted to, and just went off to the races. But now, this is a messy one. In opposition, you have the Republican Party, the ACLU, the California Nurses Association, and in support you have Andrew Yang, California Professional Firefighters, U.S. Representative Ro Khanna, who is a pretty progressive legislator. Um, Nancy Skinner, also very popular legislators in Northern California and very liked in the Democratic Party. Um, so it's really interesting. Usually, I kind of see where the parties stand. I usually see where there's some politicians, and I do like a lot of Andrew Yang stuff. So you usually kind of look at that to figure out what these politicians are thinking and what they're mostly favoring, and that's where you kind of get the idea of an opinion of where to vote on. So based on that, you would lead me to vote yes on this. But here's what I'm gonna say. In fact, strongly urge people vote no on Proposition 24. It goes back to that. Even if you are down for what the proposition is doing, if the implementation of that is going to be kind of wonky and problematic, then voting no almost says, hey, it's not that we don't care about this, but go back to the drawing board because the cure might be worse than the disease. That's a overused phrase that's been used to justify opening parts of America quickly, despite COVID-19 spreading, and then we've seen the results of that. More than 210,000 people are dead unnecessarily, which is sad. We just never talk about that enough. But moving on, the thing I was kind of getting at with Proposition 24 is that this is not the right way to fix this problem. I was doing a lot of research about this, and I eventually found the ACLU where they came up on this. And I disagreed with the ACLU's voter guide on this, so I didn't just go straight to it. But Prop 24, the Civil Liberties Union, where they check and see the ramifications of how legal measures affect people's actual like privacy and rights, and they look at this very closely to the point of obsessiveness. According to their knowledge, and they do have a lot of knowledge on this, they say it's a fake privacy law. Instead of increasing protections, it requires people to jump through more hoops and adds anti-privacy loopholes for big business. And that's kind of the sniff I read on this. Again, I'm weighing heavily on the ACLU's opinion here because they do a lot of really good work. They're pretty principled in things, and they know their stuff when it comes to civil liberties and the protection of those things. Again, I don't usually agree with those when it comes to the First Amendment, specifically with the ACLU. But with privacy protections more broadly, the ACLU has been on the right side of things in a lot of my book. I know Andrew Yang and Ro Khanna, they probably mean well, but they're also very ingratiated closely with the like the not technocracy, because we think of technocrats in like a certain way, but the technological they're close to big tech is what I'm saying. Andrew Yang, Ro Khanna, Ro Khanna represents he's in the U.S. congressional district that's basically a lot of Silicon Valley. So um, even though Ro Khanna is a Justice Democrat and he doesn't take like corporate PAC money, some of his individual donors or whatever may not be like, Mark Zuckerberg or, the big evil ones. But there are people who are like middling management, senior management at these tech companies. They think of themselves as generally liberal people and maybe even want to be taxed a little bit more. But they don't fully understand the ramifications of privacy, in the sense that they may want to make sure that their kids don't use Facebook or use any of these social media platforms where they're giving away their information, but they don't mind if other people's kids do. I just think that these tech companies have not done a good job at managing privacy, and it's time for the government to step in. But this looks like it does. Yeah, it doesn't make that process easy. It doesn't make that process of ensuring that information is private and protected and dealt with in a responsible way on the part of the tech companies that deal with our information and deal with and have a monopoly on our information. Um, so yeah, I'm voting no on that. And this is a case of why it's very important to not just look at who's supporting and who's opposing, but really kind of get into the meat of the law and figure out if this is the best way to address this issue, or if they should go back to the drawing board in some other kind of way. I will be getting the DA's race. I will be probably wrapping up with that because the rest is sort of super specific. And I'll use some of my local voting things as an example of how to vote locally, because as you get lower and lower down the totem pole of going down ballot from like national races to state races to local races, you'll find there's less and less and less information about these things. So you have to get a lot more savvy about using the internet to figure out how you want to vote. But so I'll use my localities as an example, and then I'll have some time for questions, and then we'll kind of leave it up to that. But we're almost done. I think we actually are, because there's no 26, right? Yeah, there's no Prop 26. So look at that. We made it only an hour and a half afterwards to the last one. I knew this would be long. That's why I want to do a live stream version of this. I was more interactive. Much appreciation, Bam. I think you're Sean, but Havoc Project, to keeping me company on this. Much love, much appreciation. Day one, homies. Proposition 25 is replacing cash bail with risk assessments. And this is another tricky one. This is another very tricky one. A yes vote would uphold the contested legislation, Senate Bill 10, which is a Senate bill in California that would replace cash bail with risk assessments for detained suspects awaiting trials. A no vote would repeal the contested legislation that would keep cash bail in place. Now, cash bail, you get arrested, you get a bail that's kind of roughly based on the crime you did and your likelihood to avoid your court date, meant to be a deterrent. But cash bail is usually a way for like a slap on the wrist for really wealthy individuals to ignore really having to do jail time or anything like that, or any of the ramifications of jail time, like losing your job or anything like that, by just paying this lump sum of money that if you're rich does not matter, but if you're poor, bail definitely hurts. So Proposition 25 is meant to kind of replace the cash bail system with risk assessments, and based on that risk assessment, would be decided whether or not you would just remain in jail or not, to make sure you show up on your court date. But basically just get rid of the cash bail idea in general. SB 10 was designed to make California the first state to end the use of cash bail for all detained suspects awaiting trials. But the issue with this, much like the one where it seemed good on the margins, but actually turned out to, it's like the DNA one. Yeah, it was 20. We're like, okay, we're going to get a little bit tougher on crime to make sure we get rid of some of these loopholes here, but we're going to collect DNA from misdemeanors. It's like another one of those you're not solving the problem in the right way kind of situation. So we're getting rid of cash bail, but the way we're doing that is looking at other factors, which opponents argue somewhat fairly could be used in like a racially discriminatory kind of way. And it doesn't even really assess or show what assessment tools will be considered or mandated, and there's not much scientific research to prove that these new assessment tools would be accurate and reliable. So it's like we'll end cash bail with these new assessment thing, but it could be that the assessment idea is worse or more discriminatory. So I think it's an interesting one. You can come down either way of this. Again, this puts me on the side of against the Democrats and in favor of the Republicans over here. But again, on the opposition, you'll see down here you have California's NAACP, the Crime Victims United of America, California Business Roundtable, Black Chamber of Commerce. So you have a lot of the businesses thing. It's definitely a tough one. I can understand you going either way on this because the people who are veto or want no on this just don't really want cash, who want to keep cash bail in place in general. But I don't want to keep cash bail in place. I just don't want to replace cash bail with something that is just as unfairly punitive. Is kind of my framing of it, which is why I vote no. That doesn't necessarily agree that I want cash bail to be in place, but again, I don't like how it's being handled with these new assessments that haven't really been tested yet. This is that it's we talk about lesser of two evils a lot with Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, but here's where it gets the real meat and potatoes of lesser of two evils, where you don't have a write-in option, you don't have a maybe. And if you do want that maybe option, there's your opportunity to get involved in politics on a really more close level. So those are the propositions. I'll find some way to like make those more digestible, and I'll publish those for later to watch on demand. But let's do the DA race because that's really interesting. In Los Angeles County, there are two people running for district attorney. The incumbent is Jackie Lacey, who is, I think, one of the first black district attorneys in Los Angeles. Definitely kind of like a trailblazer in that sense. Also a trailblazer for letting killer cops go scot-free from crime once they are in these cases where they are found killing or seriously injuring people of color, or at least the police are, LAPD. Jackie Lacey just kind of lets these cops go scot-free. There are countless gut-wrenching stories of the ways that LAPD treated a lot of these fellow Angelinos, and the way that Jackie Lacey just kind of looked the other way, and ultimately came down on the side of protecting the police in every step of the way. The police unions sure love that, and I'm sure the police unions are protecting her at this time, where she's getting a lot of criticism from Black Lives Matter and other restorative justice groups. But that is definitely like another thing to consider. Jackie Lacey, like the saying has been like Jackie Lacey must go. That's the thing that's been going on for a long time, and especially been chanting during the Black Lives Matter protests. And I don't blame you. Jackie Lacey is a pretty terrible person. George Gascon is the person running against her. And in the DA race, there was a debate recently. Apparently, the LA mayor said that he was switching his endorsement from her to the challenger, George Gascon. It was interesting. He was a district attorney in San Francisco. He has experience there, and he's promised a lot of, or proposed a number of different reforms for the police in response to the George Floyd protests and the Black Lives Matter movement. But there's one thing, there's a significant problem with George Gascon that we should all kind of worry about and consider. Because George Gascon is kind of doing this op-ed is not where I'm getting all my information from, but I have this up here because it does a good job of like summarizing the point I would like to make. But he is throwing a lot of shit against the wall, saying that Jackie Lacey failed to hold cops accountable. The issue that Gascon had is that in 2015, San Francisco police officers shot Mario Woods 26 times and killed him, and Gasson refused to prosecute any of the officers. That's one of the big cases on Gasson's record that shows that, okay, he's not too different from Jackie Lacey and letting cops go for really egregious police killings. But this one's really relevant because it's this case in San Francisco of Mario Woods that Gasson refused to act on, which was the reason that Colin Kaepernick started kneeling at San Francisco 49ers games. And it was the reason he started protesting. That was like a lot of the catalyst for the Black Lives Matter protest and the Black Lives Matter movement more broadly. It was a lot of what Kaepernick was doing and a lot of the kneeling was happening. And so that's where you're kind of getting to the point, is that if you're a district attorney, you're kind of climbing up through the legal system, doing all the legal things you possibly can to do right. And then you have to make it up through that system and not bat heads for like rocking the boat or anything like that. And then all of a sudden you have to, if you're coming out on the progressive side, turn against the system you're working against and say, okay, we're going to reform this, we're going to change this. Meanwhile, your career has to have happened on the backs of working class people and people of color. Bam has a really good point saying, any DA got to be a damn freedom fighter to take on 12. You got to be ready to die. That's kind of true, right? Like, if you're going to be a DA and you're going to work within the system to fight the system is going to fight you back in whatever context, especially the context where you are keeping the police accountable. There's the now legendary Power Report rant that Bam did, saying the police are a mafia and a gang. And in LA specifically, there has been extensive work done for Whistleblower showing the different regional LAPD street gangs from like Compton to South Bay to East LA to all these different things. And they're like street gangs for the cops. So like that's what people are going. That's the kind of the apparatus we're fighting against right here. Is that's how much the cops are ingratiated in the culture. So much so that the people that are coming to supposedly save us from this siege of the police basically just give them a pass. In the best of cases, give them a pass. So there is no viable write-in candidate for district attorney other than Jackie Lacey or George Gasson. Jackie Lacey has been in LA and has like done all these things, and that's kind of the thing. And yes, I see Rule.James in the chat. I am from LA and I've done this voter guide and the propositions for California and Los Angeles specifically. I'm in a city within LA County, not Los Angeles specifically. And I'm going to do a couple of things that are more local so I can demonstrate how to vote locally potentially. So you can build that kind of process of how to figure out these local votes for yourself. Because as I iterated earlier, it is difficult to find information on local ballot initiatives the more and more you dig because there's just less information locally. But if you have any questions, drop them in the chat and I'll try to answer them, even if they're specific to your local area and it's not in LA. But I wanted to do this for example. And because the Jackie Lacey one in LA is very highly talked about and politicized here. This is another one of those cases where your vote says something more than what the candidates are saying. And so if you vote and if you vote for Jackie Lacey saying, I'll take the devil I know over the devil I don't, Jackie Lacey knows that her behavior up to this point gets a pass because she got voted in despite all of the Black Lives Matter protests and the brouhaha over her treatment of these cases. She will see that is at least untouchable for the time being and vindicated, and she will certainly let more killer cops off the hook in the future. It's almost certainly going to happen. Will George Gasson let off killer cops in the future? Almost certainly. But at least with him, you have a chance to say, hey, we elected someone new because we didn't like the person that came before us. We expect you, George Gasson, to know a little bit more about what we're talking about, considering the entire political movement got started off of George Gasson's inaction. Colin Kaepernick started kneeling because of George Gasson's inaction, in part. So at least we'll be able to go to George Gasson if he's elected as DA and say, look, we elected you to be different. Now's the time to start being different, or else that's what special elections are for. So this action, the vote you're doing right now, it doesn't end today. It's a very tough decision. You have to make a decision based on, look, I can't really vote my conscience on this one because there aren't a country of voters I can kind of lay and trust fall against, right? There'll be very few people voting for DA, more so now because of the attention that's been brought to it. But usually these down ballot races, fewer and fewer people vote for. All the attention goes up to the ballot races at the top. So your vote really does matter in these smaller races. I say, regretfully, unfortunately, terribly, George Gasson's probably the better one to go for, only because we have the rhetorical argument of saying, we elected you, the challenger, to be against these things. And now's your opportunity, George Gasson, to repair your record and work in a better way to keep the police accountable and make sure the police are doing their job to protect and serve communities and not to over-police, beat, and kill minorities in these communities. So George Gasson, if anything, because that's telling Jackie Lacey that she's got to go and that she can. It's going to be one of those things where, like with Joe Biden, I will be there day one. Down even going to the marches down there. You might even see me. Making sure that George Gasson is keeping LAPD accountable and not making Jackie Lacey same mistakes. I'm not holding my breath that he doesn't, but I'm saying you have a better chance than voting in Jackie Lacey again and saying that, okay, now I have carte blanche to just continue what I'm doing. Because no matter what political pressure I think is there, I'm still going to win. The race looks very close right now, so I'm urging people to go for George Gasson. And that's about as passionate as I can get about it. I'm not passionate about him as a politician necessarily or as a person, and I think he's going to be pretty shitty, but it's better than telling the status quo to continue going. You got to at least say within a vote somewhere that, hey, we're not cool with this to some extent. All cops are dirty. Do you think a shower or something would work? Yeah, I wish. I wish we could just get some showers for the cops, get some showers for the homeless people, because they aren't being provided with showers, and that would be a nice thing to have. But a lot of these cops do take showers, and they're nice houses that are very far away from the communities that they're policing. Um, Oftentimes, while they're policing places that are below the poverty line with lead in their water. So they're taking some pretty damn good showers, all right. Sorry to make your point. I know you're just joking around, but I guess I'm just like talking seriously to make sure to understand the serious of the situation. But I understand you're joking and just kind of being unjust. So that's pretty much it. The rest of my ballot is like pretty straightforward. Like there's a Democrat or there's a Republican. And even if the Democrats kind of like milk toast, I just like can't vote for the Republican because I can't give that party a pass for what they're willing to give a pass to. Um, so yeah, I'll take. So here's an interesting one that's like very local for me. Um, so for state senator, I um I live and I vote in slightly different locations, but I'm only voting once, so screw y'all, people who are claiming voter fraud or whatever. But I vote in California State Senate District 33, so that is where my ballot is in that case. So to give an example, I'm going to go to Ballotpedia, and this is going to be how you would do this for yourself. Ballotpedia is a great resource for just learning about these things generally, and learning about politics. So learning about, not just learning about politics, but learning specifically about the races that are happening. I got a little more truly left, but then we'll wrap this up soon because I've been going pretty much 2 hours straight. But I have enjoyed this. This is really fun. So yeah, I'm gonna search for So one of the people running is Lena Gonzalez. And oftentimes if I search for names, I'll eventually get to the races. District 33 right here. So this shows the general location of the district I vote in, not even necessarily where I live. But Lena Gonzalez is the current incumbent for California State Senate District 33. We can go to the election here. So the election is between California has top two primaries, so it doesn't. The elections don't have to be between a Democrat and Republican. It's usually by the top two vote getters in the state's primary. Throwback to Dan from the Internet #1, and so yeah, in the primary, it would appear that oh yeah, this is a very deeply blue district, anyways, and a lot of the the top two vote getters were Democrats. And Elizabeth Castillo was a write-in candidate with 205 votes, and Lena Gonzalez appeared to be the only one running with 109,000 votes. So she looks like pretty much a shoo-in. But just to be fair, let's look at Elizabeth Castillo and why she's running. Because if you have someone who is running against a Democrat inside the Democratic Party, there could be a number of reasons for that. It's usually because the person who is running, the challenger, is either thinks that the incumbent is too extreme or not extreme enough, too far left or not far left enough. So you kind of want to maybe see these. I lean further to the left than most of the Democratic parties, so maybe I'll want to see. Elizabeth Castillo has a campaign website. It's not the most clean thing, but you can sort of see what she's about here. And it's for rent control, single payer healthcare, economic pandemic protections. These are really, really strong, generally progressive things that tend to be more progressive than like the standard Democratic Party leading things. For example, single payer healthcare, specifically single payer, is a thing because single payer healthcare means that there's one entity that pays the healthcare. That entity is the government. The government pays for healthcare costs through taxes. And that means everyday Americans, we pay through healthcare costs through taxes. But the overall efficiency of having that one single payer system as opposed to having a multi-payer system with multiple different service providers and insurance companies, that would save health insurance costs and that would provide universal coverage, meaning everyone is covered. Now, a lot of people want to provide universal coverage in a way that is not single payer. So you can have single payer healthcare that is universal and covers everyone, but not all forms of universal healthcare that covers everyone, are single payer. It's one of those kind of confusing things. Like square is a rectangle not a square. I'm probably messing it up. It's like one of those things. Single payer is the strongest, is the one Bernie Sanders was arguing for. That's Medicare for all. There's some bastardizations of that plan, like Medicare for all who want it, or Medicare for all who can afford it, or all those different dumb things. But those are usually kind of clouded in healthcare or Medicare, or Medicare for all plus or something like that. It's not straightforward. It's some extra catch to it. So single payer healthcare is strong. I really like that. You can see bio endorsements, like places that have endorsed her. Websites have varying levels of strength, but she seems to have like a good amount of endorsements from people, immigrants, grassroots, people of color. So yeah, she seems pretty cool. It is based on the primary results in my particular area. It does not look like Elizabeth Castillo will win based on her own, but I like that she is a registered nurse and has experience working with sexual assault survivors, and I like that nurse sort of background makes her a lot stronger with healthcare proposals and things like that. So I would definitely consider voting for her, at least in my local area, um, to have someone who is more progressive in the state senate. Again, there are fewer and fewer people voting for these things because fewer and fewer people do the research like we just did. So your vote can really make an impact. So please consider voting for these things. And if I vote for someone further to the left on the state level and they actually win, that's one more voice in the state legislature that's advocating for Medicare for all, single payer health care, for a Green New Deal, for stronger rent controls, for all these things that could happen on a state level in California with every single person we can get it to that point. And if it passes in California, as goes California, so goes the nation is the saying. It's not perfectly true that everyone just copies California, but if we can try it out here and prove that it's good, that gives it a better possibility for that legislation to continue. So that's how you kind of want to consider voting, is see how your vote affects the larger picture of policy in much of a similar way like that. And it'll help you kind of figure out who's who on here. And yeah, there's other things like in Long Beach and in Ballotpedia, you can find ballot measures by county. So maybe like you won't have information on Long Beach's Measure US, which is currently on the ballot here. Let me find it. Yes. Because if I go here in Ballotpedia, for Measure US, I'll actually get a blank page because, I mean, there's a lot of measures to go through. Not everyone's editing Ballotpedia, so I'm happy for the people who are editing it, but there's some missing stuff. You get some basics right here, like a yes vote supports the measure and a no vote opposes the measure. And the measure itself is increasing the city's general purpose oil production tax, basically doubling it and increasing revenue estimated by $1.6 million per year, in addition to the city's special purpose oil production tax of 33 cents per barrel with revenue dedicated to police and fire services. So basically, increasing oil taxes in order to fund police and fire services. And this is a specific thing. I happen to know that Long Beach is part of the Los Angeles oil basin thing. Oil field is like from the La Brea tar pits up in central Los Angeles, down all the way to here, Los Alamitos, whatever. It's like a lot of oil here, and companies have been using that for the past 100 years to kind of benefit from that. We have offshore drilling in Long Beach. There's a lot of stories about that, how there are fake islands, island set pieces floating off of the coast of our city because the people who live close to the beach don't want to look at oil rigs all day. So that's how they were able to compromise and continue to do offshore drilling while making it at least look environmentally nice. There's so much stuff you can go down there. I'm sure there are rabbit holes within your city too, where you can find out these ridiculous sort of policy measures that have accumulated over the years. But I would go into your local newspaper, so their coverage of this, to say their editorial board has anything to say, but don't let the editorial board be the end all be all, because editorial boards have their own opinions and it may not be as cut and dry or whatever. This seems like we're taxing oil producers to bring in more revenue for the city, and we produce a lot of oil, and we shouldn't be producing oil. So if the oil producers decide, hey, you know what, I don't want to produce oil in Long Beach anymore, I'm going to leave or instead start producing cleaner energy so I'm not taxed as much, God bless. Whatever. So I would vote yes on Measure US. If you're in Long Beach, there's that answer. But that's the thought process for how I would vote for anything else. You just search on Ballotpedia, do a little bit of searching online, maybe consult with some other trusted voter guides or things like that. I was looking at DSA's voter guide, Black Lives Matter Los Angeles as well. Not to make my final decision, but to see, okay, what are these people saying? What are these different organizations, each with their different slight variations and things in there? What do they recommend on voting and doing? So that's all really good and that's all really fun. I hope that helps y'all get a sense and get an idea of how to vote and who to vote for and how those things will work. Remember that voting, all everyone's saying, please vote, don't forget to vote, la la la. It's more than just a single action, and it should not be where your political behavior begins and ends. Voting is just one thing you do, one aspect you do to keep the democracy going and to participate in society as like a good, healthy citizen in a good way. You also participate by keeping in contact with your elected officials, getting to know them, making sure that you are like advocating for issues on behalf of your community, really speaking up and not speaking for your community. And yeah, just being smart and really thinking about that. So I think I will close it, sort of wrap it up, end it there. Thank you all for coming and joining and participating in this thing. This was really cool to do this voter guide thing. I think it will be helpful and useful for people. I'll break this up. I'll break this video up and organize it so you can kind of skip through and pick out which aspects of the vote make sense for you, what you're interested in, and yeah, without further ado, I might just let me know. Follow me on social media at Dan from the Web on Twitter, Dan from the Internet on Instagram. Subscribe to me on YouTube or Twitch, wherever you are. Follow me, not just for vain reasons, but the feedback helps me kind of figure out what are the best uses of my time and what kind of things I can do to help you understand politics more and engage with politics more. I like this medium of being able to chat with people. I might just start like playing video games or some shit and just like chill and talk politics like that. There's a lot of different things I can do, or I can just embrace my full introverted self and do absolutely nothing. So that would be a perfect time for my camera to crash. I'll just go to the wait screen and we'll call that a day. Thank you very much for being here at this point, and yeah, I will talk to you soon. There'll be more power report and more audio face, so make sure you're checking that stuff out too. And yeah,